Hey, this is Hidalgo News Review, and I'm Ryan Hidalgo. So I'm going to be talking about Tulsi Gabbard today, and I'm mostly going to be focusing on foreign policy, but I'd like folks to get an introduction to her, as well as some of the progressive policies she backs, and why I think why I regard her as my second favorite candidate in this race. So November 2012, she gets elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. She was the first Samoan American to be elected. She was the first Hindu to be elected. Her youth, her ethnicity, I think it caught the eye, and plus the fact that she's a veteran, I believe all played a role in her immediately upon being elected becoming the vice chairwoman of the DNC. At the time, the chairman was Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was a very controversial figure during the 2016 election. So, January 2013, Gabbard is vice chair of the DNC. May 2015 rolls around, and at this point, there was some controversy regarding the debate schedule, right? There was only going to be 6 debates, which is extraordinarily low. And this was designed to help Hillary Clinton, who was more well-known. She was already highest in the polls, and it would hurt anybody that was not well-known and didn't have that name recognition. Now, in 2015, in fact, the DNC stated they would bar candidates who participated in unsanctioned debates from the sanctioned ones. In other words, you couldn't even try to go to one of these informal debates to get heard because they would bar you from the sanctioned debates. And this was outrageous. And guess who took a stand? Tulsi Gabbard took a stand. And what that amounted to, her complaining about the debate schedule, amounted to her in October being disinvited by Debbie Wasserman Schultz from the first debate. She couldn't even go, which is wonderful. So February 2016 comes around. This is when Tulsi Gabbard leaves the DNC and then endorses Bernie Sanders. So, rising star in progressive politics. Now, regarding her actual policies and what she supports, she co-sponsored Medicare for All. She voted against PAYGO, which she was one of the few legislators to actually do this. A lot of Democrats, including Ilhan Omar, voted for PAYGO. PAYGO, what it involved is any new item of spending would have to be offset by cuts in spending, which makes progressive legislation extraordinarily hard to do in that context. There would be no new deal with PAYGO, something like PAYGO shackling FDR. So Tulsi Gabbard also is opposed to warrantless wiretapping. She's on Americans, and she opposes the Patriot Act, and she opposes the prosecution of whistleblowers such as Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and Chelsea Manning. On climate change, she initially was in favor of the Green New Deal. Nowadays, she says it's too vague. But at the same time, she also introduced her own energy bill called the OFF Act, which is very detailed. And among other things, it invests 100% renewable and safe energy sources like wind, solar, and geothermal. It supports a ban on fracking, and it ends the $26 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies, as well as subsidies or waivers to the nuclear power industry. Now, let me talk really quickly about Gabbard's tone, her style. Now, she's more soft-spoken. You see her in any interview. She seems so diplomatic and soft-spoken, and she is diplomatic, which is great. But she's also not afraid to throw punches when they need to be thrown, and that's going to be evident when I show the clip of the July debate where Tulsi Gabbard took on Kamala Harris. So let me get real briefly to some criticisms of Tulsi Gabbard. What you'll usually hear is her past stances on issues related to gay rights. And you will also hear her being called a Hindu nationalist. So I feel like the claim regarding gays is significantly weaker. She got elected at 21 years old to the Hawaii House of Representatives, and her father was a very prominent anti-gay activist, and he also got elected. So this is a very political family. But in 2003, some of the things she did while serving in the Hawaii House of Representatives was she was against the resolution targeting anti-gay bullying, which she feared would amount to causing homosexuality to become normal and natural. She invited, and she was afraid it would invite homosexual advocacy organizations into the schools to promote their agenda to vulnerable youth. She was against emergency contraception. She was against legalizing civil unions for same-sex couples. So what I have to say to that is Tulsi Gabbard was a very conservative youth. I identify with that. I watched Fox News until I was age 20. I know Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. He was a very conservative guy. When he was younger, it happens. She's changed nowadays. In 2017, she stated, in 2012, when elected to Congress, stated she presented herself as tolerating but not celebrating, right, the homosexual lifestyle. So she's still conservative, but then in 2017 she stated that gay marriage should be celebrated. Now, I don't know if she adjusted that positioning, for the sake of being more appealing, more acceptable, but the fact is that since she's been in the U.S. Congress, she has been consistently voting on the side of gay rights, and that's what matters to me personally. Regarding the claims of Hindu nationalism, this is something I want to talk about in more depth in a later video. So I'm just going to go over real quickly that she has a positive relationship with the controversial and hyper right-wing Prime Minister Modi of India. He advocates for Hindu nationalism, and he persecutes Islamic religious minorities. Now, even though I have much to say on this topic and I won't be able to get to it in this video, I do find it odd to hold Tulsi Gabbard to a different standard because it's mainstream orthodoxy in the Democratic establishment to not criticize Israel, which is governed by a hyper right-wing hyper-nationalist individual who persecutes religious minorities. So I feel like, it's a double standard if you were to hold that against Gabbard while not holding the unequivocal support of Israel against the Democratic establishment. So moving on, regarding her foreign policy views in general, she is consistently anti-intervention, anti-war. She does believe in combating Al-Qaeda, combating ISIS, but when it comes to regime change wars, she is against it. She's against continuing the war in Afghanistan. And let me quickly show you a clip from the debate, the June debate.
Today, the Taliban claimed responsibility for killing 2 American service members in Afghanistan. Leaders as disparate as President Obama and President Trump have both said that they want to end U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, but it isn't over for America. Why isn't it over? Why can't presidents of very different parties and very different temperaments get us out of there? And how could you?
I appreciate that question. So I've been in Congress 17 years, and 12 of those years I've sat on the Armed Services Committee, either the Defense Appropriations Committee or the Armed Services Committee. And the lesson that I've learned over the years is that you have to stay engaged in these situations. Nobody likes it. It's long. It's tedious. But right now we have, so I would say we must be engaged in this. We must have our State Department engaged. We must have our military engaged to the extent they need to be.
30 seconds, actually, to jump off what he said. He described engagement as the problem. Is that what you will tell the parents of those 2 soldiers who were just killed in Afghanistan? Well, we just have to be engaged. As a soldier, I will tell you that answer is unacceptable. We have to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. We are in a place in Afghanistan where we have lost so many lives. We've spent so much money, money that's coming out of every one of our pockets, money that should be going into communities here at home, meeting the needs of the people here at home. We are no better off in Afghanistan today than we were when this war began. This is why it's so important to have a president and commander-in-chief who knows the cost of war and who's ready to do the job on day one. I am ready to do that job when I walk into the Oval Office. Thank you very much.
Listen, I'm going to go down the line. I'm going to go down the line here. Well, you know what? You felt like she was responding. You get 30 seconds. Go.
Good man.
Fair enough.
I appreciate that.
I hear what you're saying.
I would just say I don't want to be engaged. I wish we were spending all this money in places that I've represented that have been completely forgotten and we were rebuilding. But the reality of it is, if the United States isn't engaged, the Taliban will grow and they will have bigger, bolder terrorist acts. We have got to have some presence there.
The Taliban was there long before we came in. They'll be there long before we leave.
Well,
we cannot keep U.S. troops deployed to Afghanistan thinking that we're going to somehow squash this Taliban that has been there, that every other country that's tried has failed.
I didn't say squash them. When we weren't in there, they started flying planes into our buildings. So I'm just saying right now,
the Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11. Al-Qaeda did.
Well, I understand.
Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11.
I understand.
That's why I and so many other people joined the military to go after Al-Qaeda, not the Taliban.
The Taliban was protecting those people who were plotting against us. All I'm saying is, if we want to go into elections and we want to say that we got to withdraw from the world, that's what President Trump is saying. We can't. I would love for us to.
Protecting Al-Qaeda right now in Saudi Arabia.
So she's absolutely right. We have little to show for being in Afghanistan for 17 years. The Taliban has retaken half of Afghanistan already. And regarding the casualties in Afghanistan alone, it's about 140,000. Now, collectively, with Afghanistan and Iraq together, that number jumps to between 480,000 to 500,000. And there's been a total of 5.9 trillion in spending. So these regime change wars have amounted to a lot of lost blood and treasure, as they would say. When it comes to Venezuela, a lot of the Democratic establishment were not questioning the Trump approach to backing Juan Guaido, who is self-declaring as the president or the next president of Venezuela, while Maduro was serving. Because, in the United States, our part of our foreign policy is opposing the government of Venezuela led by Maduro. Gabbard stated that the United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. Let the Venezuelan people determine their future. We don't want other countries to choose our leaders, so we have to stop trying to choose theirs. On The View, she stated, every time the United States, and particularly in Latin America, has gotten involved in regime change, using different tools to enact that regime change, there have been both short and long-term devastating impacts. She stated that if there are ways that we can work without surrounding countries to try to get humanitarian aid into people there, then we should be doing that. Okay, so she was against regime change in Venezuela. What about Iran? Well, take a look at this clip.
Tonight, the president insists he is the sole decision maker at the White House as reports of friction inside the administration percolate. So is there some sort of intervention in Iran on the horizon? Let's discuss it all with tonight's special guest, Hawaii Congresswoman and 2020 presidential contender, Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. Nice to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. Great to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about the Wall Street Journal quoting a senior defense official says this. This is a case where credible intelligence drove measured, appropriate operations. We know that some lawmakers have been briefed. There's a push for all of you to be briefed next week. Are you confident that the administration is taking measures in line with what they actually know?
I'm looking forward to getting that briefing. I can tell you as a soldier, I serve in the Army National Guard. I've been serving for over 16 years. I've deployed twice to the Middle East, and in Congress have served over 6 years on both the House Foreign Affairs and the Armed Services Committees. And I know two things very well. First is the high human cost of war. These wars across the Middle East and Iraq, thousands of my brothers and sisters in uniform lost their lives, many more injured. And I also know the cost on the American people. the trillions of dollars that we've spent since 9/11 alone on waging these wasteful regime change wars, how those wars have undermined our national security, and how they have strengthened terrorist groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda. So when we talk about a potential war with Iran, which is looking like we are walking very dangerously down that path, what I think is important for the American people to know is that a war with Iran would make the war in Iraq look like a cakewalk. The devastation and the cost would be far greater than anything we've ever experienced before. What's concerning to me is that while Trump and others in his administration are saying that they don't want to go to war with Iran, I hear them saying that more now that they're getting a lot of pushback from our allies, like those in the UK, when in fact the actions that the administration has been taking are telling us another story, that it's actually pushing us closer and closer to the prospect of a war with Iran. This is what I'm very concerned about, because I know that cost on our troops, on the American people, on civilians across the Middle East and the region, creating more refugees, creating more instability in Europe. I mean, the cost would be very great. They have not presented that evidence to Congress yet. So,
and you'll get a briefing next week.
We look forward to getting that information
okay.
and considering it very carefully.
And let me also note that when talking to George Stephanopoulos in May of this year, she was already pointing out that Trump was looking for a pretext to war. But whenever the June 13th incident happened with Trump's administration stating that Iran had attacked a Japanese tanker, I have found no quote from Gabbard expressing skepticism that this actually happened, that Iran attacked this tanker. Even though later the owner of the tanker stated that the attack was not done with one of these so-called Iranian indigenous limpet mines. It wasn't done from the waters. It was done from the air. So I'm disappointed that Gabbard hasn't been more explicit in being skeptical of the official State Department line, but Bernie Sanders was. If Gabbard was skeptical, I can't find any quote from her. When it comes to North Korea, on North Korea, Gabbard has been unique in that she has not been shitty like the Democratic establishment has in making fun of or mocking or stating that Trump should not be talking to Kim Jong-un to reach a diplomatic solution. Now, I'm not stating that Trump is a good candidate to be doing that, and I'm not stating that anything will come of it, and I'm not stating that Trump is competent. I'm not stating any of that, but to deride attempts, or even if it's pure optics, deride attempts at communicating with Kim Jong-un, that really pisses me off. So when it comes to North Korea, here's what she said on Fox News. She stated, "The negotiations that have already happened, I think, are steps in the right direction. I think we've got to look at our policies and see how we can help further push these negotiations forward." And on Twitter, she made a very good point in stating that Kim Jong-un sees what the U.S. did to Gaddafi in Libya, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and efforts to depose Assad in Syria. We must end the long-held U.S. foreign policy of regime change wars and deposing dictators to be credible when we say we are not interested in toppling the North Korean regime. Additionally, in Business Insider, they go into more detail, stating in 2003, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi agreed to give up his country's nuclear weapons program in exchange for the easing of economic sanctions. 8 years later, he was killed by NATO-backed rebels. In light of this history, North Korea in May was enraged after Vice President Mike Pence suggested North Korea may end like Libya if Kim didn't cooperate with the United States. So, how does this provide incentive to North Korea in denuclearizing threats of regime change? Well, it doesn't. They are a deterrent from such regime change, and it would be helpful to have somebody that is against regime change in the White House to achieve peace with North Korea, to ensure that North Korea denuclearizes. when it comes to Russia and the subject of Russiagate, Tulsi Gabbard is unique in criticizing the media coverage of Russiagate as something that was escalating what she would call a new Cold War. Let me read off a few tweets on the subject. Heightening tensions with Russia and China are sending us into a new Cold War. We need to be stepping up nuclear non-proliferation agreements, not rolling them back. Trump actions threaten our national security and the future of our planet. And she calls out the media. She states short-sighted politicians and media pundits who've spent the last 2 years accusing Trump as a Putin puppet have brought us the expensive new Cold War and arms race. How? Because Trump now does everything he can to prove he's not Putin's puppet, even if it brings us closer to nuclear war. And this is absolutely right. Trump has appointed numerous hawkish individuals to the White House. He has escalated in Ukraine. So he's done, this is a hawkish candidate on the subject of Russia. And the Democratic establishment has been very helpful in ensuring he remains hawkish. On Russiagate, when the whole investigation turned out to be a dud, and Mueller he found that there was no collusion between Trump and Russia. Michael Tracy writes that candidates running for the Democratic primary right now have collectively indulged in this Russia-Trump collusion story. And he notes that the exception is Tulsi Gabbard. He states, the only exception is Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, who has bucked the trend and sharply criticized the prevailing Democratic orthodoxy on this subject. Now, so her position on Syria has been especially controversial. It earned her the moniker of being an Assad apologist, Bashar al-Assad being the president of Syria. In a Politico article, it notes that when questioned about her stance on Assad by NBC News' Casey Hunt, Gabbard, one of Hawaii's 2 House members, said Assad is not an enemy of the U.S. because she said, he does not pose an immediate threat to the country. Pressed repeatedly, Gabbard declined to say whether Assad is a U.S. adversary, telling Hunt that you can describe it however you want to describe it. The article goes on to say, she recognized why I met with him and agreed with that meeting, Gabbard said of Ahmed, Ahmed being the co-president of the Syrian Democratic Council, because she knows how important it is that we be willing to meet with adversaries or potential adversaries, not just our friends, if we are serious about the pursuit of peace. Later on in the article, stating, when asked whether she thinks Assad is a good person, Gabbard laughed and said, no, I don't. In fact, Gabbard would say repeatedly that she believes Assad is a brutal tyrant over and over and over and over. And yet every time she appears on mainstream media, they ask her, so, is Assad brutal or what? Is he a bad guy? What do you think? As if they have not absorbed that point. And Gabbard made the good point of stating that when repeated enough times, when the interview is consistently, well, do you think Assad is a bad guy? Then it becomes propaganda. At that point, you're just not asking questions. You are participating in propaganda. So in addition to media trying to portray Tulsi Gabbard as an Assad apologist, they're also trying to portray her as the favorite candidate of Russia, right, in an effort to delegitimize her, similar to the, associating Trump with Putin. They're doing the same to her. So NBC reports, Russia's propaganda machine discovers 2020 Democratic candidate Tulsi Gabbard, with the byline of, experts who track websites and social media linked to Russia have seen stirrings of a possible campaign of support for Hawaii Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. Now, this was written directly after Tulsi Gabbard announced her candidacy for the Democratic primary. Coincidence? But The Intercept comes back with NBC News to claim Russia supports Tulsi Gabbard, relies on firm just caught fabricating Russia data for the Democratic Party. And the Intercept article reads, the only expert cited by NBC is in support of its key claim was the firm New Knowledge, which just got caught by the New York Times fabricating Russian troll accounts on behalf of the Democratic Party in the Alabama Senate race to manufacture false accusations that the Kremlin was interfering in that election. Wonderful. And even though NBC got corrected, damage is already done, the connection's already made, other media outlets picked up on it, and media outlets continue to try to associate Tulsi Gabbard with Russia. Vox, they ran an article stating, Kamala Harris destroyed debate signals how much we still don't understand about social media manipulation. And the article reads, pundits, strategists, and some of Harris's allies noted that Gabbard has a long history of being unusually friendly to Russia and suggested that Russia might be pushing propaganda to promote her bid for the Oval Office. After the debate, Harris's National Press Secretary Ian Sams tweeted out an NBC News story from February about how the Russian propaganda machine is promoting Gabbard. Again, that's the story we just talked about and just established was bullshit. Harris's campaign is very dishonest. The article goes on to state, did Kamala Harris destroyed just go viral naturally, or did Russian bots have something to do with it? Were viewers really so interested in Gabbard on Wednesday that they flocked to Google to learn more about her? The answer isn't clear, and that's part of the problem. Despite everything we learned in 2016, there's still a lot we don't understand. Yeah, apparently there is a lot that Vox doesn't understand. Vox didn't read that Intercept article, apparently, or they are knowingly lying to try to kneecap this progressive candidate. So anyways, on, when it comes to Kamala Harris, let me play this clip that first spurred that hashtag of Kamala Harris destroyed.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about reentering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response,
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Senator Harris.
My entire career, I have been personally opposed to the death penalty, and that has never changed. And I dare anybody who is in a position to make that decision, to face the people I have faced, to say, I will not seek the death penalty. That is my background. That is my work. I am proud of it. I think you can judge people by when they are under fire, and it's not about some fancy opinion on a stage, but when they're in the position to actually make a decision, what do they do? When I was in the position of having to decide whether or not to seek a death penalty on cases I prosecuted, I made a very difficult decision that was not popular to not seek the death penalty. History shows that, and I am proud of those decisions.
After Gabbard ripped Harris a new one, Harris, when questioned by media, stated that she can only take Tulsi Gabbard's opinion so seriously because she is an Assad apologist, repeating the freaking line of Tulsi Gabbard being an Assad apologist. Let me also add, which I neglected to mention earlier, that Tulsi Gabbard was given the opportunity, as was the entirety of the House of Representatives, to vote on whether it was a resolution condemning Bashar al-Assad for human rights abuses. Now, Tulsi Gabbard chose to vote against it, and her reasoning was that she saw this vote as preceding either the implementation of no-fly zones or to bolster the case for regime change, and that's her reasoning. She was also given the opportunity on a resolution to vote for a resolution condemning ISIS, and she chose to vote in favor of that resolution. So, whether you think Tulsi Gabbard's strategy is the right strategy or not, it is not synonymous with being an Assad apologist. And frankly, I would like to see more people trying to resist Trump's hawkish policies, like Tulsi Gabbard, more people speaking against having a new Cold War. Instead, Democrats have been feeding the McCarthyite flames for a while now. Anything that is leaning towards peace with Russia or peace with any of the allies of Russia, whom we also happen to be locked in conflict with, is seen as being somehow helping Russia or somehow being, it's painted with this McCarthyite brush, right? Anything that is seen as pro-Russian is demonized. And let me continue. Lily Adams, which is Kamala Harris's communications director, stated in response to some of Tulsi Gabbard's criticisms, when Tulsi Gabbard stated that Kamala Harris is not qualified to serve as commander-in-chief, Lily Adams tweeted, "Definite hard pass on taking national security advice from Assad's cheerleader." Lily Adams also tweeted, "Today's a good reminder we could have had a freaking foreign policy expert as president. Would have been nice." And let's end on that note, because Hillary Clinton is the opposite of Tulsi Gabbard. So Lily Adams is not a great person to go to for advice when it comes to who is reliable on foreign policy and who isn't. Hillary Clinton, she wanted war in Syria. She wanted war in Libya. She did not discontinue or try to discontinue the war in Afghanistan. She's never seen a war she hasn't liked, and so I'm more in Tulsi Gabbard's camp, and that's why I hope that Bernie Sanders chooses her as a vice president, and let's hope she qualifies for the next debates. Hey guys, I hope you liked this video. Make sure, if you did, to click like down below and subscribe to this channel. And remember to click the bell. That way you'll get a notification whenever a new video is uploaded. Share this video with whoever you feel might find it valuable. And just remember, the more likes this video gets, the more views, and the more subscriptions, the more this channel can thrive and grow. Thank you.